Is this just going to be another one of those tiny, crappy mini altcoin seasons where you can't really make much money? Or is it going to be a truly massive altcoin season this time, like we're used to from the past? There are some very important things to keep in mind. Let's take a look at this step by step now. But before we continue, friends, please leave a like and a comment on the video so it reaches as many people as possible, because this video was also a lot of work. Alright, let's get started. There are really two types of altcoin seasons. There is, on the one hand, the classic altcoin season that we actually know from previous cycles, where we see a continuous build-up and really massive capital flowing in, and pretty much everything performs well. But in this cycle, we've already had 3 or 4 altcoin seasons, which were much smaller, and they were more like these little phantom altcoin seasons, like Solana altcoin seasons, where Solana really took off, and we always saw those whenever the RSI was in the overheated range. That's when we had these small Solana altcoin seasons. Above all, the meme coins really took off, but it still wasn't quite the real deal, because there's simply a big problem with these small altcoin seasons. People tend to hold onto the coins for too long because that's what they're used to. In a phantom altcoin season, you really should only hold the coins for a maximum of 1 month and then get out, because you can lose money way too quickly. Meme coins, as you know, are so volatile. They can skyrocket in one day and then be down 60% the next. That's a huge problem. But even in a real altcoin season, we also have a problem. You'll end up selling too early and miss the opportunity of a lifetime. There will be coins that really do 1000x, and I promise you that. But there are a few things you can pay attention to in order to figure out whether we're really in a true altcoin season or not. And it's very, very important to have a checklist like this in mind and to understand how and what you should be looking out for here. First, we should look at the Bitcoin chart, specifically the daily chart, and watch for when we break through the 25 EMA, because there are really significant correlations here. If both Bitcoin and the altcoins are above the 25 EMA trend, that's really the best thing that can happen. If Bitcoin is above it but the altcoins are below, that's not so good. If both are below, that's really bad. And if the altcoins are significantly lower here, then it's completely over for the altcoins. And I'll show you this now using the charts. In this cycle, we basically had these step-by-step staircases as we built up, especially with Bitcoin, but also with the altcoins. In this area, we had a small altcoin season, and here as well. But that was over once we broke through certain zones here, because when we broke below the 25 EMA on Bitcoin here, and the same thing happened with the altcoins on the same day, from that point on, it was all downhill for the altcoins completely. Bitcoin, for example, still formed a small higher high after that, and it's also holding up better here. But with the altcoins, it really only went in one direction. That's why you absolutely need to pay attention to this. I can also give you another example. Here, our first Bitcoin high in March, when the ETFs were released on April 12th, we broke below the 25 EMA on the altcoins in a sustained way. Let's switch over to the altcoin chart. Here we can see it very clearly. On April 12th, we also broke below it here in a sustained way. And when it was then broken below in a sustained way, you can see for yourselves what happened with the altcoins. A lot of money was really pulled out here. With Bitcoin, we remained much more stable in this regard. That means this indicator is extremely meaningful for seeing when altcoins are performing and when they're not. There are really a few things you need to pay attention to here. This indicator is very, very meaningful in this regard. Then we absolutely have to take a look at the funding rates on the exchanges as well. In this area here, you can see for yourselves, when things really turn yellow and the funding rates keep getting higher, then it should be clear to you that we don't have much time left. That could be the top, but currently we can see that we're not at that point yet. Here, I'll show you this again using this chart. Up here you can see it, Bitcoin price, and here, open interest. Bitcoin and open interest have risen sharply, but in comparison, the funding rate hasn't increased dramatically yet. The higher the funding rate rises, like here in December 2024, the more risk people are willing to take on, but the faster everything will cool off as well. So, the higher we go with the funding rate, the more certain you can be that we only have a few weeks left before we experience a total crash here. And here we have the Bitcoin chart, and now we're adding the premium indicator. This one is really important. Take a look at it. Here we can see that whenever we move into this green area, people are taking on significantly higher risk. It's exactly the same here. If we move over into this green area here, You should also know that we probably only have about 1, 2, maybe 3 months left before we see a stronger correction. But within these 1 or 2 months, prices really take off and people become significantly more risk tolerant. It's important to understand this here. In these areas, people take on really big risks, and that works to our advantage. The question now is, how do you recognize all of this? How can you tell if we're experiencing a real altcoin season like in the past, or if it's just another brief, phantom, meme coin alt season? You can kind of tell by the fact that only 1 or 2 narratives are pumping. You can also recognize it by the fact that the pumps are very fast but also drop off quickly, and that only a few coins are outperforming Bitcoin. That's exactly what we saw at the end of last year during that big Trump rally. Only a few coins were able to outperform Bitcoin. The dangerous thing here, though, is that a lot of people think this is the starting signal for a massive altcoin season, but they're actually confusing it with a mini phantom altcoin season. That's why you have to be extremely careful here. Because in a real altcoin season, it's important that, yes, the entire market actually benefits, and that the money is gradually rotated, just as we know it, first into Ethereum, then into the mid caps, then into the low caps, just like it was in the past. If that's the case and the whole market really does benefit, then it can actually work out. But that only works if we see an expansion of money supply. And we haven't really seen that expansion in the US yet, but the M2 money supply has reached new all-time highs, and there's more and more capital flowing into risk assets. That's why this is already a very, very positive sign at the moment. But for a real altcoin season, it's also important that on the monthly chart, Bitcoin enters the overheated zone on the RSI. When we enter this overheated zone, that's exactly when a massive altcoin season happens, just like we saw here. I mean, we also saw a strong increase here, but we didn't have an altcoin season here because we didn't enter this overheated zone. That's why this overheated zone for Bitcoin is extremely important, and we haven't reached it yet in this cycle. We were already doing pretty well here, but we still need that really massive overheated zone for a truly huge altcoin season. For that altcoin season, where the entire market benefits and where you can really turn $10,000 into $100,000 within 3 or 4 weeks. But you have to be very careful with that. Things can shoot up extremely fast, but of course they can also drop just as quickly. You should definitely remain cautious in that situation. To add my personal perspective here, I think that right now we might see a few jumps in the altcoins. Maybe some of them will perform a bit here and there. But overall, it's more of a smaller altcoin season, like we've seen several times in the past. Because things will probably only get really interesting for the altcoins when the M2 money supply keeps increasing. But if the Fed balance sheet comes into play as well, if we actually see monetary expansion in the US and not this tight monetary policy anymore, I think that will be the starting signal when things really get interesting, especially for the altcoins. And I estimate this period to be more around August, September, October, November. So more towards Q3, Q4 of this year. And not now during the summer months, because right now we can see that we still have a tight monetary policy, and this policy will probably only become more relaxed in September, but the whole thing isn't really a big deal. The higher the overall market rises and the higher Bitcoin goes, the bigger the altcoin season will ultimately be, and that's something you need to understand. I've made a table for you about this. Depending on when the drop happens, the more money will be left for the altcoins. Imagine we're at 125K with Bitcoin, and we see the drop from 60% dominance to 40%. Then we'd have about $3.6 trillion for the altcoins. But if Bitcoin is at the 200,000 and the drop from 60 to 40% dominance happens, then there would be almost double that for the altcoins, meaning about $6 trillion. And believe me, that's so much money that the altcoins will just explode, absolutely go through the roof. And that's why it's not a big deal if the whole thing gets delayed a bit longer. In the background, we can see anyway that the big whales, the smart money, are diligently accumulating without end. And the smart money will also want to sell at some point. But they will only want to sell when the retail investors come in so they can sell their Bitcoins to the retail investors. And that's why it's not such a big deal if things continue like this for a few more months. As long as we just hold certain zones, everything is still fine. And we're still completely in an uptrend. But it also has to be said that such alt seasons are no longer like they were in the past. A lot has changed here as well, of course. You just have to act a bit smarter here. You can't hold on to the coins for too long. you probably have to switch them back and forth more often. And I recognized that early on and also shared it with you because in our trading VIP group, for example, we opened spot positions here on April 6th, 4 spot positions that you could buy on April 6th. Here, only the ENA trade and the sweet trade were triggered, and with both positions, we're now up over 100%. At this point, I would slowly start withdrawing money from these spot positions and reallocating it into other projects where I see more potential. And if you want to take part in all of this as well, join the VIP trading group. It is completely free, but everything else is explained in the description anyway. So now let's move on to a quick interim conclusion for this video. Of course, this is a great phase right now, and it's really nice to see a project like Ethereum finally taking off properly. Ethereum is currently outperforming Bitcoin, and this is giving real hope for the altcoins. That's all well and good, but it's actually better if the altcoin season doesn't start right away and gets delayed a bit. Because if we see the altcoin season in the next 4 weeks, it will ultimately be weaker than we hope. And what do we want? We want a massive altcoin season, a real altcoin season, like in 2021, like in 2017, and not just some half-hearted thing. But we wouldn't get that right away. The big altcoin season is going to be delayed a bit. Because even though we have a 4-year cycle here, we still have to take the real economy into account in net, and we haven't seen any interest rate cuts yet. We still have tight monetary policy at the moment. And one of the most important things for the altcoin season is the expansion of global liquidity, but also the Fed's balance sheet. Both together are ultimately what flood the market with a huge amount of liquidity. Both are important, not just one thing. We need both for a massive altcoin season. Otherwise, this altcoin season couldn't be compared to the previous cycles. So it's all well and good that we've seen a bit of a drop in Bitcoin dominance right now. But we had that back then as well, and then we recovered again. We regained a bit of strength, and then the big drop came. So as I said, it's actually better if all of this drags out a bit longer, and the next altcoin season doesn't start right away tomorrow. We just need a few more months here, so that we can really see loose monetary policy and interest rate cuts in the US. That's simply a fact. Nevertheless, it is already guaranteed that we will see interest rate cuts and a loose monetary policy in the US this year. And that's why I'm so optimistic and firmly believe that we will definitely see really strong performance in the crypto market this year, especially with the altcoins. But it's not a problem if this drags on for a few more weeks. Thank you very much for watching. You know what to do, friends, and until next time.